It was the kind of morning that makes you believe the day will go exactly as planned. The sun had just risen over the skyline of Atlanta, washing the streets in a soft, golden light that made the glass buildings sparkle. Tanya Whitaker was up earlier than usual, not because she had to be, but because she liked mornings like this. The streets were calmer, the air was cooler, and the city felt like it belonged to her for just a little while. She sipped the last of her coffee as she backed her silver Toyota Corolla out of the driveway, adjusting the radio to her favorite jazz station. She had an easy smile on her face, thinking about the meeting she had later at the nonprofit where she worked. She loved her job, helping struggling families find stability again. That work wasn't glamorous and it didn't make her rich, but it made her feel like she was making a real difference. Her only errand before heading to the office was to deposit a check at the First National Bank branch on Peachtree Street. It was a place she had visited several times before without incident. Tanya wasn't a stranger there, though she couldn't say she was a known face either. She didn't expect much from the visit, maybe a polite nod from a teller, a quick transaction, and she'd be on her way. But life, she was about to be reminded, has a way of blindsiding you in the moments you least expect it. The bank sat on the corner of a busy intersection, its glass doors reflecting the morning light. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet and orderly. Soft jazz played through ceiling speakers. A handful of customers stood in line, and behind the counter were 3 tellers and the branch manager, a woman Tanya had never interacted with before. Name was Sharon Reeves, though Tanya didn't know it yet. Sharon was in her early 50s, with sharp features framed by a perfectly styled bob haircut. Her navy blue pantsuit was immaculate, accented by a string of pearls that caught the light when she moved. She stood with an air of superiority, the kind that seemed to make the air around her heavier. Sharon had been managing the branch for almost a decade. To the corporate office, she was a no-nonsense leader who kept the numbers up. To the staff, she was strict, controlling, and often condescending. She had a knack for sizing people up the moment they walked in, and for some reason, her assessments often came with a layer of bias she would never admit to. Tanya joined the line, waiting patiently, her check and ID in hand. She noticed Sharon looking at her, not a glance, a look. A slow up and down, followed by the faintest tightening of the lips. Tanya wasn't the type to take offense easily, so she let it slide. She reminded herself she didn't know this woman, and maybe Sharon was just having a bad morning. When it was her turn, Tanya stepped up to the counter and greeted her politely. "Good morning, I'd like to deposit this, please." Sharon took the check, glanced at the amount, then at Tanya. "Do you have an account with us?" she asked, her tone flat but laced with something Tanya couldn't quite name. "Yes," Tanya replied, offering her account number. Sharon didn't start processing it right away. Instead, she disappeared into the back office without a word. Tanya assumed she went to verify the check, nothing unusual. But when Sharon returned, she was holding something unexpected, a cold bottle of water. Tanya's first thought was that maybe Sharon was being kind. Maybe she had noticed Tanya looked warm from being outside. But there was no smile, no explanation. Sharon twisted the cap off, stepped closer, and without warning, tipped the bottle forward, pouring its contents directly onto Tanya's blouse and hands. The cold shock made Tanya gasp, stumbling back as water splashed onto the counter and dripped onto the floor. The entire lobby froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The only sound was the trickle of water and the faint jazz still playing in the background. Tanya looked down at her soaked blouse, then back up at Sharon, who wore a faint, almost smug smile. "It looked like you needed to cool off," Sharon said lightly, as though it were a joke. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. A man in line pulled out his phone and began recording. Another customer whispered to someone beside them, "Did you just see that?" Tanya's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she didn't raise her voice. She grabbed some tissues from the counter and began blotting at her clothes, her hands trembling slightly. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with disbelief. Sharon just shrugged, her expression unreadable. Tanya could feel the weight of every eye in the room. She could have argued, demanded to see the district manager, or called the police. But instead, she took a slow breath, placed the soaked tissues on the counter, and said in a quiet, steady voice, "You'll regret that?" There was no threat in her tone, only certainty. She turned toward the door, ready to walk out and put as much distance between herself and this bank as possible. The glass doors opened before she could reach them. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped inside, his presence instantly commanding attention. His stride was confident, his posture straight, and his eyes scanned the room in a way that suggested he was used to being in control. This was Henry Whitaker, Tanya's husband. Most people in Atlanta's banking and finance world knew his name. He was the CEO of Whitaker Financial Group, a multi-billion-dollar company that, among many other holdings, happened to own First National Bank. Henry had been in the area for a surprise visit to another branch when Tanya had texted him earlier that morning to say she'd be stopping by this one. On impulse, he decided to surprise her with coffee. What he walked into instead was a scene that made his blood run cold. He saw his wife, his Tanya, standing near the door, her blouse soaked, water dripping onto the floor. He saw Sharon holding an empty bottle, looking defensive, and he saw the expressions on the customers' faces: shock, outrage, curiosity. What happened here? Henry's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Sharon, not recognizing him, waved a dismissive hand. "Just a little accident." "With a customer?" she said. Henry's gaze shifted to Tanya. "She poured it on me," Tanya said simply. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sharon laughed nervously. "Oh, come on, it was just—" Henry cut her off sharply. "Do you know who I am?" Sharon blinked, hesitating. "Should I?" she replied, trying to sound confident. Henry stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. "I am Henry Whitaker. This is my wife, and you just assaulted her." "In my bank?" The color drained from Sharon's face. Several customers gasped quietly. Henry turned to the assistant manager, who stood frozen. "Nearby, call corporate HR, now, and get the district manager on the phone." He pointed at Sharon. "Collect your things, you're done." Sharon's mouth opened to protest, but Henry didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority was absolute. "You treat people like this when you think no one is watching." Well, someone was watching today. "And that someone owns this building." Within minutes, the corporate reps arrived from the district office. Security escorted Sharon out, along with two tellers who had been caught on video laughing during the incident. Henry draped his jacket over Tanya's shoulders, his voice softening as he asked if she was okay. Customers approached Tanya to offer tissues, kind words, and in some cases, their own stories about Sharon's past behavior. Henry took their names, assuring them their complaints would be handled personally. By the end of the day, the incident had gone viral. Videos flooded social media with captions like "CO walks in and fires manager on the spot," and "Atlanta bank manager messes with wrong woman." People across the country weighed in, praising Tanya's grace and Henry's swift action. For Tanya, it wasn't about revenge, it was about dignity. And as she sat with Henry that evening, sipping tea and watching the sunset, she thought about how a single moment of cruelty had been met with an equally swift act of justice, and how sometimes life doesn't wait until the end of the day to balance the scales.